Josh, this case will be different in terms of the surrender. So, of course, in other cases, Trump was released on his own recognizance. But here we know that the parties have negotiated because the judge was likely going to set a cash bond. And I think one way this will be different as well is we are fully expecting Donald Trump to have his mugshot taken and for him to be fingerprinted.
And so that was the question I was going to ask you, is about the booking photo itself. Now, that is going to be released to members of the media, to the public. We have not seen that happen in the other three cases against the former president. What are your thoughts on that overall?
Well, there's a presumption that court documents, including booking photos, those are public filings and they should be accessible to members of the media and the general public. That's why you see a lot of celebrities here in Los Angeles, where I am, have their booking photos released to all sorts of news outlets. So if truly they're going to treat Donald Trump like any other criminal defendant, that's appropriate in this case.
I want to go back to basics. I say that time and time again. People are following these cases, but they may not know fully which case we're talking about, as there are now 4 criminal cases against the former president. Can you kind of break down for me the allegations that Trump does face in this case out of Georgia?
Well, this case is similar to the D.C. 2020 election fraud case, and the allegations broadly are that Donald Trump tried to unlawfully overturn the results of the election. The charges are a little bit different. In the federal case, they're charging conspiracy. Here they're charging RICO, which is essentially a racketeering statute that charges folks that are involved in a criminal organization that engages in a pattern of racketeering activity. And in this case, that racketeering activity is alleged to be intimidation of a former president, Mike Pence, other election officials, and a scheme to submit fake electors in response to the certification of the 2020 presidential vote. So one way that this case is also very different is the sheer number of defendants. We have 19 total defendants, many of whom are lawyers. So it's going to be a case that's going to take a lot longer to work its way through the system than the others, potentially.
We talked about the booking photo itself, but we are being told that cameras are going to be allowed in the courtroom if this does go to trial. Now, in the other cases, that was not the situation. We've been told no cameras in court. What effect do you think this has on the case overall for the American public to be able to see what is happening and how all of this does play out?
Well, I think it's going to have a huge impact. And we talked about filings being public. And, you know, there is a presumption that courtrooms are accessible to the public. However, in federal court, there's a rule, and that's the rule of Criminal Procedure 53 that says cameras are not allowed in federal court. That's why you see those courtroom sketch artists. But that doesn't apply in state court. So a state court in Georgia, it's up to the discretion of the judge, could should really allow access to cameras and audio recording in a case like this.
What comes next in this case overall? As we mentioned, normally we don't see a surrender, we just kind of see the arraignment. So I imagine what's next would be an actual arraignment.
Normally, if someone's arrested and they have to appear before a judge within a certain number of days to be arraigned. But in this particular case, the next step would be an arraignment. Really, the question is, will the judge allow the former president to appear virtually? Will the judge allow Trump to waive arraignment altogether? Because as we've seen in other cases, the arraignment is going to be a very quick, not guilty plea. We don't know if it necessarily makes sense to bring Donald Trump, his entire Secret Service entourage down for a quick hearing like that.
And that's a good question, because when you think about it, you have that happening today for part of that surrender. And, you know, if you do it again, then you have an arraignment where this whole situation has to happen again. Now, DA Fani Willis did say earlier on today in a filing that she now wants the trial to take place 2 months from now on October 23rd. Your thoughts on whether that is even realistic? Because a lot of people that I've spoken to have said when initially she wanted the day before Super Tuesday, that seemed unlikely. So 2 months away would be highly unlikely.
Josh, I agree with you. It is going to be impossible to try this case in 2 months. But she's really trying to call Kenneth Chesebro's bluff. He's asserting his right to a speedy trial, which is his absolute right. Now, of course, Fani Willis wants to try everyone together, but there is no way in a complicated case like this with so many co-defendants, unindicted co-conspirators, witnesses, that the parties are going to be ready to try this case in 2 months or even March. It's just not going to happen, especially when many of the defendants are lawyers and they're going to be raising all sorts of challenges, whether it be attorney-client privilege or executive privilege. There's a lot that needs to be sorted out. I think this is overly ambitious and aggressive. And we've seen Fani Willis do this once before in the Young Thug rapper case, where she brought a lot of co-defendants into court. And the reason it's challenging is every single witness gets to be cross-examined by multiple defense attorneys, sometimes upwards of a dozen. So it's very challenging to try a case with this many defendants and this many lawyers.
We've talked about this in the past, but what about seating a jury? That's a question that can be tough in any case, but how difficult is it when you're talking about the former president who, there's no question, everyone knows who he is, and most people are fairly familiar with this case?
Josh, jury selection is going to take a long time, not days, probably weeks. Everyone in the country, and certainly in Fulton County, has heard of Donald Trump and has an opinion of him. You want jurors that are going to be fair and impartial, judge the case based solely on the facts and the law and the evidence in that case. But when you're dealing with the most politically charged prosecution in American history, it's going to be no easy task to find a jury.
Yeah, I can imagine, as you mentioned, it's going to go on not for days, weeks, who knows if it's months at this point, but yeah, we'll keep an eye on all of that. So how does this case overall compare to the other ones that are against the former president? Because there are now 4, and which one would you say is the most serious? We know that all of the charges in themselves are serious, but ranking them, is this more toward the top?
I think this is more towards the top. I think the Stormy Daniels case is the least serious. That may even be reduced down to a misdemeanor. There's an interesting wrinkle in New York law that if the fraud wasn't in furtherance of or to cover up another crime, it's not a felony. So that's definitely at the bottom of the list. The classified documents case is an important case, but certainly in terms of the seriousness of the charges, attempting to overturn a presidential election, that's going to be the most serious. It doesn't matter how it's charged, either it's a conspiracy or a RICO. The charges matter less than the nature of the allegations. I would probably say the federal case in D.C. is the most serious, only because as a former federal prosecutor, I'm biased. That carries the most, this is the most likely prison sentence, in my opinion, because rarely do convicted defendants in federal court receive anything less than significant prison time. But I think this Atlanta case is going to be a 1B right behind that case.
Normally, I believe we see people tend to surrender maybe earlier on in the day, and you would have arraignments earlier on. I want to get your thoughts just overall on the fact that former President Trump now says that he wants to surrender at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time there in Atlanta, releasing that on his Truth Social. Now, initially, he said he would do it in prime time, which is anybody's guess what that means. But what are your thoughts overall on the former president essentially turning himself into authorities in prime time when all of the newscasts are on?
Well, sometimes Trump is doing things for political reasons, not necessarily legal ones, but I think you can throw all the conventional wisdom out the door when it comes to this case. We had a grand jury there in Georgia that was seated till well into the evening hours. So to the extent that Trump is going to surrender after court hours, after business hours, normally it's not something that happens, but I think you can put normal aside when you're talking about this particular case.
All right, Neama Rahmani, former federal prosecutor, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Is there anything else that you want to add about all of this before I let you go?
I think it's going to be a fascinating case, and I think what's interesting about this case is the sheer number of co-defendants. That's going to make it drag on a lot longer, and there's a reason that Jack Smith didn't charge any of those co-conspirators. They're all unindicted co-conspirators. I think that case is going to be fast-tracked, not this one here in Atlanta.
And that's actually something that I want to ask you as well, is do you think a lot of these are going to end in plea deals because there are so many co-defendants, and it would be a little bit more difficult to do a trial with 19 co-defendants?
You know, there's 2 schools of thought here. The first is that, you know, obviously if you're Jack Smith or Fani Willis, you want those witnesses, co-defendants, co-conspirators to flip on the former president. But by charging all of them, you risk the case dragging on past the November 2024 election. Obviously, in a case like this, Trump has a political and legal strategy, and that strategy is to delay the case. Because if he's elected president, all his legal problems go away. The Department of Justice has long said that a sitting president can't be prosecuted. So Smith wants to get this case done as quickly as possible. Willis wants to do the same. I just think Smith positioned himself and his case to do so. I don't think Willis is going to be able to. She waited too long. She convened that special grand jury that just really issued recommendations, and now she's probably going to be fourth in line.
All right, Neama Rahmani, thank you so much as always for taking the time to be here.
Thanks, Josh. Talk to you soon.
All right, you are taking a live look outside Newark, New Jersey, where in the next little bit, we do expect that former President Trump will get on his plane and fly over to Georgia. That is a live, raw, and unfiltered view coming in from our affiliate out there. We also have this shot that we have been showing you over in Fulton County, Georgia. That is the jail where we have seen supporters lining up throughout the morning into the afternoon ahead of Trump's surrender. He does say on Truth Social that he expects to surrender to Fulton County authorities at